Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started here. It's just about 1 minute after scheduled start time. So the way we'll kind of proceed with everything here is we'll just open it up for statement first from New Mexico State Director of Athletics, Mario Moccia, and he'll be available for questions following his opening statements. And then from there, we'll pivot over to any questions directed toward NM State head football coach Doug Martin and NM State head volleyball coach Mike Jordan once they're both on here. So Mario, go ahead and take it away, and we'll go ahead and get going.
All right, thanks, Charlie. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Today was obviously a very disappointing day. If you're an athletic administrator, maybe the toughest one in my tenure, to tell a large number of sports about postponement. But before I start my comments, I'd certainly like to recognize that a member of our Board of Regents, Deborah Hicks from Hobbs, is on. So thank you, Regent Hicks, for being here. It's my understanding that Regent Devastali might be on as well. And I know that our Chancellor, Dan Arvizu, is listening in, as well as our Deputy AD, who might be called on if there's any specific questions, Bron Cartwright. As I said, so today at 8:30 this morning, I addressed the football team in the stadium and attempted to answer any questions that they had, along with some of our staff members. As a reminder or as a baseline, there's 53 out of the 130 Division I football schools have made a postponement decision. We're obviously 54, so we joined the Big Ten, the Pac-12, the Mountain West, the MAC conference, as well as the individual schools, Old Dominion, UMass, and UConn. The factors that went into this decision, there's not one single factor, but there was a lot of issues that we had to face. Number one was we had a very, very solid return plan. I was very happy and appreciative of all the individuals who put that together. I mentioned that in our release. Dr. Kathy Hanley, Regents professor and a very well-respected virologist. Dr. Michael Landon, who was the former State of New Mexico epidemiologist for the Department of Health, put that plan together. So we felt excellent about it, even though just like a lot of other schools, we had positives here and there. I thought it was a great plan. Now, recently, there has been more and more talk about potential long-term health issues regarding COVID. And while, this is a very, divisive time with a lot of different pieces of information coming at you, the reality is, that is a concern that many people had in our medical area. With enlargement of heart, et cetera. I was listening to CNN on the radio the other day, and they had a Pac-12 president talk extensively about this. So that was certainly one big factor, the long-term health of COVID-19. Certainly our schedule, everybody knows we had a 12-game schedule. We were down to 4 contracted games. So while we had an enormous amount of conversations with other schools, that was something that was going to be maybe a little more difficult to put in a meaningful schedule and get those games under contract as opposed to, discussions. So that's another factor. Obviously, right after our announcement, the Western Athletic Conference postponed fall sports. So another factor is, with your fall sports not participating, but having your football team participate certainly is another factor. And I think, probably the biggest one, and it doesn't get a whole lot of notice, is currently the state of New Mexico has a 14-day quarantine. It would be impossible to have a football season and adhere to that existing guideline from the state of New Mexico with the 14-day quarantine. Obviously that, from my understanding, extends throughout the month. There has been, nothing about hey, in September, we won't have this. So we're going off of what we have from an information right now. So those were the factors that led to our decision today. Certainly our leadership has been in multiple conversations, President Floros, Chancellor Arvizu. So, you know, the decision obviously was not made lightly. I've talked to most all of you individually about my desire to play. You know, I was talking to somebody and, you know, look, finances is everything, especially at a place at New Mexico State. But the reality is with the Florida and UCLA games gone, this had turned in the last several weeks about wanting to give the student athletes the same opportunity that I had 30 years ago as a baseball player at New Mexico State. We wanted them to have an opportunity to compete. And while, yeah, money's a factor, we were like, hey, we know we're going to take a hit this year, but we want to do everything we can to play. And I think the factors just got, you know, they were, it's kind of like a teeter-totter. You put the factor, and all of a sudden, you know, the teeter-totter swinging in the bad direction. So that is it with football. You know, there was a few questions. And then immediately after that, I met with the soccer, our women's soccer and our women's volleyball program at 9:15. Yesterday, the Western Athletic Conference Board of Directors voted unanimously to postpone the fall season. And you know, it was funny, I told the team at the present time, I believe it was 17 out of the 32 conferences had already made the decision. And after our decision, I saw at least 3 or 4 have already made that, from the Big Sky to the Southland to, I don't know if it was the West Coast, I can't remember, but now I believe it's 20 or 21 conferences have made that decision. I just got off a phone call with the Western Athletic Conference, as well as all the athletic directors, and I know the NCAA is doing surveying of moving the fall championships to the spring. We certainly hope to be a part of that. And then, you know, from a decision-making standpoint, obviously, those teams that I mentioned, as well as cross country, you know, they do a lot of commercial travel and the long-term health. I will say this before I yield my time. We certainly want to play in the spring, along with the other 53 teams that have made this football decision. What that looks like, we don't know at the present time. I don't think there's anybody that knows that. And certainly for our fall sports of soccer and volleyball and cross country, you know, we want to compete in the spring as well. And those decisions have not been made yet. But I just want to make that emphatically clear. You know, we want to compete, we want to play. Obviously, we don't have a ton of information, but we will keep our ear to the ground. And that's what you know, before questions are taken, I'd certainly want to leave you with that message from New Mexico State that, you know, we've got great teams and we want to compete in all of them.
Are we just jumping in now?
Correct. Yeah, just anybody. Go ahead.
Well, I want to start off with Mario. I'll ask you, but I also want to extend this to either Regent listening or Chancellor Arvizu. You mentioned the 14-day quarantine. Obviously, a big part of the equation to all this in the past couple of weeks in New Mexico has been that the governor has been very outspoken with her request that football and fall sports, contact sports, not be played this fall. You talked also about the extensive conversations you've had with so many people. Have any of you guys spoken with anybody from the governor's office? And was that in any way a factor in this decision, or was it just the letter and the overall idea that you knew she didn't want you guys to play? As far as the governor's role in this, what conversations did you guys actually have with the governor's office?
So Jeff, I'll take that particular question. Yes, President Stokes from UNM and myself had a conversation with a couple of the staff folks on behalf of the governor, and the governor's message was delivered to us regarding her her encouragement to not have a fall season for some of our contact sports. And in both cases, both President Stokes and myself indicated, first of all, we fully understand the governor's concerns and we're very attentive to those. What we didn't want to do was get in front of our respective conferences. We wanted to get the information that we had from those conferences. So that would then obviously drive a lot of the decision process that we needed to have. Clearly, local conditions are important, and we would take those under consideration. So even if the conferences had said one thing and we knew we had a very different set of circumstances, we might make a different decision. But our attention was to try to be responsive to both what the NCAA guidance was, in our case, the WAC conference guidance was. And those two things, I think, were primarily the factors that we wanted to hold off on any kind of decisions. And so actually the governor's encouragement was actually important. But at the same time, I think our decisions were made both on the discussions that Mario has already talked about, all the factors that we consider important to our long-term both health, safety, and ability to continue to be good partners with our respective conferences. So we wanted to make sure that we didn't get in front of the other major decisions that need to be made. All of us were recognizing that this was a potential outcome and it was likely, and obviously with some of the recent activity in terms of spread of the COVID in other states, I think had a lot more to do with it than what we have here locally. But frankly, I think it was the decision that was made pretty much with all of the factors, including the government's input, to help us try to decide and balance all of the various factors that were part of the decision process.
One quick follow to that, and I do see, obviously, I know it looks like Deborah Hicks is going to also chime in. One quick follow, and this is for anybody, is just in any of those conversations with the governor's staff, since she was suggesting it and so publicly urging it, has there been any conversation, maybe not specifics, but about money and about help and aid that might come to either university or any of the universities, not just UNM and NMSU, that she asked not to play?
Yeah, no conversations about anything that related to finances at all. That did not enter into the discussion.
And Jeff, with regard to the regions having a conversation with the governor, direct conversation with the governor, to my knowledge, and I was checking with the chief of staff, none of us have had a direct conversation. My own personal stance on that was, that we are going to stand behind the administration's decision, and we talked about NCAA and having a conversation with the governor, even though she invited it last Thursday and welcomed it, that's not something that we did.
Thank you.
And Jeff, just to put a little bow around it from an athletic spin, obviously in this state, Lobos and Aggies are very rarely locking arms together, but in this instance, I think the thought was, hey, if we could play, the Lobos and Aggies would get together and maybe do something, make a plea, or make a recommendation, what have you. And when the Mountain West Conference canceled that, that put us a little bit on our own. So obviously, that was something that we were thinking about partnering up with them. And when they postponed, that wasn't available. So just from an athletic standpoint.
Thank you, guys.
Mario, I have a question for you. Yesterday, we talked and you were really gung-ho about moving forward. And I know there were obstacles. You just talked about teetering. And what was it specifically that kind of pushed it? Obviously, the WAC decision was one thing, but as far as football, what was it that pushed the teeter to the top side?
Yeah. I tell you what, we knew the WAC had multiple votes. And every vote, the WAC had voted to, hey, let's wait and see what's going to happen. And when the WAC vote came down yesterday, that would mean, 15 of our 16 teams are not, not all 15, but, the fall sports would not be participating, and not just soccer, volleyball, and cross country, but it also would be a cessation for men's, women's golf, men's, women's tennis, baseball, softball. And then it becomes, how do you justify those student athletes not participating, but football participating. And that's where I lean to the fact where, some cynical people are like, well, it's all about money. Well, we didn't have any guarantee games or buy games on the schedule. We just really wanted to give the student athletes an opportunity to play. And I think, Jeff, if you're looking for one of the kind of straws that broke the camel's back, not that the WAC has a whole lot to do with being an independent in football, but certainly I would suggest, besides all those factors I listed, that was one that maybe tilted the scales a little bit.
I had one for Mario or Chancellor Arvizu. You both spoke about how you want to play spring sports. That's the plan right now. Can you talk about your plan regarding testing moving forward if you were to do multiple sports in the spring semester, when as of now, unless I'm not right, that the NCAA requires a certain number of tests within 72 hours of competition. So to me, that would be increased testing. I was wondering what the testing plan was going forward.
Sure. Well, I'll address that. Bron could obviously talk about our current testing plan. He's our testing plan guru. He's on 47 committees. But I do think that if there is one bright spot about spring competition, is that I'm very confident that what we know today from testing, we will know a lot more, in the spring when it comes to competition. And I would go out on a limb that I would hope that testing would also be perhaps not as expensive, from an individual test standpoint. So, testing has been a hot topic nationally, certainly even on our campus. And the boss, Chancellor Arvizu, has been working very diligently on testing. But I do feel that while that's a factor, we'll know a lot more. And, Jason, we were prepared to test this year. So, we'll be prepared to do whatever we have to from a WAC or NCAA standpoint when the time comes. I don't know. I'd ask my deputy AD if he wants to put a bow on that, and certainly the boss too. But from a current athletic testing, Bron, you want to chime in on that?
You bet. We had actually started this week kind of our surveillance testing, where we were testing teams that were going to compete this fall on a weekly basis. With these decisions, we've obviously pivoted that decision and looking at doing surveillance testing. NCAA does have some guidelines for out-of-season testing. We're currently working with our on-campus partners and Department of Health to start the process of testing all of our teams kind of on an out-of-season method starting in a couple of weeks.
Hey, Mario, as far as the
Hey, Colin, hold on. I didn't know if Chancellor wanted to put a bow on that.
sorry about that.
Yeah, I'll just say a couple of more words about testing. For us to actually return back to campus, testing was actually one of the critical pacing items that we needed to be able to have some assurance that we could actually test. The biggest challenge with testing right now, especially in the state of New Mexico, is that even though our spread rates are relatively low compared to the states around us, like Texas, Arizona, Colorado, the challenge is that for the FDA sanctioned types of tests that the Department of Health from New Mexico actually monitors, there is in fact a limitation on how many tests can be conducted because of a shortage of reagents and some of the test kits that are required in order to do the tests. So I was just talking to one of our colleagues from one of the testing labs here, and the testing has been suspended for the last couple of days just because we don't have pipettes to be able to do kinds of tests, those types of testing. So that's a real issue for us. Fortunately, we've entered into some relationships with partners, Tricor being one of them, where we are looking at research approaches to actually do the screening that's necessary at the frequency and turnaround time that's necessary for us to have meaningful results, especially when you test asymptomatic people. Most of our athletes that have tested positive in our early testing have all been, or most of them have been asymptomatic, meaning that it's challenging to get the sanctioned so-called FDA-approved test because you have to be symptomatic or have doctor's orders or be in a particular hotspot in order to have access to the rationed kits that are out there to do actual testing. And as a consequence, we are going to be using some diagnostics that are more in the research area, but they give us a very, very good handle on who's positive and who's not. And we are able to do that to manage spread on our campus. And then we would use that particular tool as well for our athletes. And that gave us some comfort that we could manage this in a responsible way going forward. We'll get better at that. And so I think the testing will be much better. And I might also give the governor a shout out. She was actually very instrumental in us getting acquisition of some systems that allow us to do that testing in real time. So I think there's a lot of movement in the testing arena that gives me great comfort that we'll be much better for that in the future than we have been, and overcome some of the limitations that the present testing regimes actually offer us.
Thanks.
Hey, Mario, as far as the athletes in fall sports, cross country, volleyball, soccer, football, what's kind of the plan for them right now in terms of, are you sending them home? Are they staying on campus and continuing kind of voluntary workouts? What's the athletic department plan for them right now?
Yeah, good question, Colin. We addressed that today with them. Currently the NCAA has not offered any guidance from the practice standpoint. Obviously, through our plan, we were cleared for practice, et cetera, et cetera. So school starts on the 19th. So, it's my anticipation nobody's going home. Everybody's here on campus. But I would anticipate that workouts in some way, shape, or form will continue. I think from the mental health standpoint for our student athletes, it's important that they stay active. I think with everybody's plan on having these sports shift to the spring, much like baseball and softball and both golfs and both tennis, have a fall portion in preparation for the spring. I kind of see that along the same line. So I until there's NCAA guidance on hours that you're allowed to, et cetera, I would think nationally you're going to see the vast majority of these sports continuing their practicing and their training in some way, shape, or form for multiple reasons.
Mario, what do you think needs to happen from a eligibility standpoint? I know the Division I Council recommended some eligibility relief. Just in your opinion, if these sports aren't able to have a season, whether it be in the fall or the spring, what needs to happen eligibility-wise, and how much of a, mess does that create with seniors that you think are going to be gone and incoming freshmen, and just all of that standpoint that I'm sure you have at least a little bit of experience from in the spring?
Sure. I think hypothetically, if everybody's allowed to play in the spring, it probably maybe doesn't matter as much. But if there is a shortened spring season, or if, now I'm talking volleyball and soccer, if there's no championships, that is a possibility that you have either teams redshirt if they have that ability, or they get another year back, much like what we saw with the spring sports. In football, it's going to be very interesting, and I'll be following it very closely. Of the 53 other teams that are playing in the spring, what format are they going to look at, and where do we fit in? Would it be conference only? Would we have the ability to play UNM and UTEP? Obviously, there's other independents, Liberty, BYU, UMass, UConn, Army. How much is a worthwhile season? Could we have a 4-game spring and still retain eligibility, because you're allowed to have 4 football games and still retain your eligibility? So would you use that as a glorified spring practice? So you're not taxing the team with too many games. They turn around and play in September. I think there's a million questions. Braun obviously has a tremendous background in compliance for over a decade. I'd maybe ask him to add anything onto those comments if he has anything.
I think you summed it up. I know there's been discussion about if you play less than 50% of a season, potentially being able to redshirt that season. That was discussed by the NCAA Council yesterday. They'll meet one more time next week before the board makes decisions on all the information they pass along to them. So hopefully by next Friday, we'll have a better handle on what the fall and spring will look like for the fall student athletes.
Mario, I have a question for you, and then Chancellor, if anyone else wants to chime in. I know somebody touched on it earlier in the call about you haven't had any conversations yet with the governor regarding any possible financial aid making up for, revenue lost by, say, some of these, games, ticket sales, anything like that. Are those conversations that you guys would be open to? Is that something that you guys have discussed internally, I guess? Or also, too, is it something that maybe have you guys had donors possibly reach out to you, yet saying, hey, is there any way we can help, anything like that?
Yeah, well, Nate, I'll tell you, and I just saw that Regent Devastali joined us. So I can say this unequivocally with the Chancellor and 2 regents on, yes, I would accept any help if anybody was going to offer it from a state of New Mexico standpoint. Let's get that straight. Have donors reached out? I will tell you this, and I know it kind of defies conventional wisdom, and I know that we just made this announcement, so we'll see what individuals want to do. But, right now the Aggie Athletic Club is up $50,000 from this point last year. I just drove and I had one of our donors, a realtor, wrote me 2 checks that totaled $3,500 and said, I know you guys really need this. That was $1,000 more than they did. So that's just a little microcosm of, I think, Aggie fans get it. They know we're going to be in a tough spot financially. Just to toot our horn, we've balanced our budget 11 out of the last 12 years. So we've been very good stewards of what we've been given or what we've raised ourselves. I would be lying if I told you I foresee a balanced athletic budget in the future this year. But the reality is, we will have plans to continue as many non-competitive events as we're allowed that are revenue generating, because we certainly want to do everything we can to make up for the deficit of not having these sports right now in the fall.
Coach Martin, can you hear me, Coach Martin? Coach Martin. Is Coach Martin still on the call?
Yeah, he's right next to you there, man.
Hey Coach, he's right next to me. Hey, Coach, can you tell me how players responded to the news? Because that's a pretty good blow when you've been training and all that stuff like that. And then we talked about it with the Lobos. Even mentally, you got to kind of watch them because you got a pandemic going on, and then this happens too. And so, how did the players respond?
Yeah, I think obviously they're disappointed, man. They all wanted to play and they've worked really hard to get to this point. I think just the unknowns and the things that are going on is really difficult for all these kids to handle mentally. So, I have a lot of respect for them for what they've been able to do during this time, because they've all been great about, working hard and asking questions and just trying to communicate. But there's a large disappointment for them right now. Obviously, they want to play.
And I know Mario was talking about possibly those guys continue the workouts. You guys will do that, right? Continue your workouts and do things like that, or?
We will. We'll look for the guidance from the NCAA, what we're exactly allowed to do. And we know moving forward, obviously that'll involve some strength and conditioning, which honestly our guys need right now. They haven't been able to train this summer like they normally would for a season. So that's much needed. And then just to see what we can do practice-wise, as soon as we get definition, we'll move forward in that.
I guess for anybody, is there results from the tests that were done on Monday and Tuesday? Have they come back yet?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. We tested half of our team on Monday and half of our team on Tuesday. I was pleasantly surprised that we got a significant amount of results back. I think from that first group, we had 20 negative tests and 13 we had not heard from. Ron, I think those are pretty accurate numbers. Is that right? Yeah, so he's shaking his head. So Colin, that first day, we tested, I want to say 33 guys. I wish I was more prepared and had it in front of me, but so far I think we had 20 or a little bit more negative, and no positives. We're just waiting to hear from the rest of that first and second group.
I had a question for Coach, if you can hear me, Coach.
Yes.
What's your comfort level and preference when it comes to your players with classes? Do you prefer them only online? Are you okay with them doing a hybrid?
Yeah, I think we're okay with them doing the hybrid. I think, what the university's put in place is very sound and very safe. And I think taking the students' well-being into consideration. I know talking with our players, I think they're comfortable either way. They understand they need to social distance and wear the mask. And the good thing about our guys is they've kind of been trained to do that all summer, whereas the students are just getting here. Our guys are kind of used to that now. And I think so that's going to help them during the fall to adjust.
Mario, I got a question for you, Mario.
Go ahead, Van.
Hey, so I know no one knows, this is so uncertain, no one knows what the future is, but have you guys already started to have those talks that possibly nothing will be played for a while, just because, I was talking to Doug about this earlier about no vaccine yet and all that. And so you're really working with a moving target.
Yeah, there's obviously a lot of questions. The next logical thought process is basketball. We talked about that today. As of right now, from an NCAA standpoint, there's been no edicts, but it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. Obviously, traditionally there's scrimmages in late October. The season, I believe, is allowed to begin. I don't know, is it November 10th maybe is the first day of potential competition. So, that's kind of next up on, hey, what are we doing? What are we thinking from a basketball standpoint?
Mario, you're going to have some fans that are just disappointed, don't really understand, the gravity of the situation and everything. Just your message to fans, the NMSU fans who are disappointed with the decision, anything you'd like to say to them?
Yeah, look, I think we've got a great relationship with our fan base. Their disappointment is magnified by our student athletes' disappointment because, they're here to get a great education and they're here to compete. That's what our coaches do. That's our livelihood. And many of us in administrative roles, we've chose this profession because we enjoy the competitive aspect of it. And we actually feel that, we're here to give our student athletes the same experience that we had when we were student athletes. So, I feel for them. I think we will ramp up our engagement of them from a social media standpoint, from a telephonic standpoint, from an email standpoint, and allowable events. We had a golf tournament that was sanctioned golf tournament with all the regulations. We will do that again in October. We'll have a couple of other little specials that we're going to be announcing in the next couple of months. That's a little teaser for you guys, not necessarily athletic related, but yeah, I feel for them. Obviously you heard from Doug Martin. I'm looking at Mike Jordan. The man was 27-4 last year. We have a championship caliber volleyball program that's capable of advancing in the NCAA tournament. And, that's, there's disappointment all around. We have an emerging soccer program that, is ready to take that next step and be, a championship as well. So I feel for the fans. I share their disappointment, and we're going to do every single thing we can to get back on the field, the court, the pool, et cetera, to compete.
Not that I was called out by Mario, but Mike, I was going to ask you about, you guys have almost been in the background on this whole thing. Everything's been so focused on football, and understandably so.
Yeah.
And your ladies have been sitting there in the background. I got to believe anticipating, or at least understanding that this was coming. How did they take it, and where do you go?
Jeff, it's been emotional a little bit. We did see this coming. I've had a lot of conversations with my players the last couple of months. So this was no surprise or shock to them, but they're disappointed, obviously. We expect great things from our program. I think we're going to be a very good team, and we had a heck of a schedule. I had Notre Dame, UCLA, Arizona State, and Auburn all coming here this year on our non-conference schedule. And when that got wiped out, that was disappointing for all of them. I think a lot of people don't know that when it's all hit in early March, we were 1 week into spring practice, which is 6 weeks long. So that all got blown out of the water. So it's been a long time since we've been on the court. We just started practice again, and everybody was excited to get going. That's the flip side to it, is everybody's happy to be on the court just playing volleyball, even with the masks. So we're happy to do all that, but I think the big concern right now is for our seniors. We've got 4 of them, and how will this play out with possibly their final season? Obviously, we're all hoping we can play in the spring. I would love to just cut and paste our fall schedule into the spring, but we don't know what's going to happen. That in and of itself is problematic. I feel for them in particular more than anybody else, but we are happy to be back and practicing, and that's an exciting thing. Hell, I think if they said you got to play on ice, we'd probably be happy to do that right now. We're just happy to be out on the court playing volleyball, but it's a struggle, and but everybody understands safety first, and we hope a good plan gets put in place.
Coach Martin, can you talk about what you feel about playing football games in the spring? How many games is worth it from a player standpoint? You know, I've seen a lot of things about not knowing if we want to play 2 football seasons in a calendar year. Like, what's your initial response to spring football, and how many games would you say would be worth it?
Yeah, I think if you're going to play in the next fall, Jason, I think it's really hard to play, obviously, a full schedule in the spring also. So those games would need to be limited, in my opinion. You know, I really like kind of what Mario was talking about, a 4-game schedule. To treat this like a glorified spring practice, more than an extensive spring practice, I think would be really valuable for the players and for the fans, and kind of generate some interest going into next fall. But I just worry about the health of the players physically, not from COVID, but just physically, injuries and those type of things. If you're going to play up to 8 games or 10 games in the spring and then turn right back around and play in the fall, I think football-wise, you're really starting to tax those young men quite a bit. And I think there just needs to be some concern on their part for that. So, you know, somewhere around 4 to 6 games, I think could be very doable and would be beneficial.
And Mario, you don't know the finances yet. You don't know any numbers, but do you know yet if this decision is going to impact either furloughs or layoffs? I don't know where you cut, but do you know yet if there's any administrative cuts that are going to be coming because of this?
Yeah, Jeff, I will tell you that, you know, through our leadership meetings, you know, our President Floros and Chancellor Arvizu, but, you know, this is, I'd say maybe mainly the president's area, has asked us to prepare for a different series of percentage-wise cuts. Certainly, we had a little advantage being in athletics because we had student athletes coming back, you know, in June. So we've got a wonderful CFO in Ed Pasaski, and we've got a lot of cuts, reductions that we've already thought about. We have not had discussions about personnel. You know, obviously that's something we would like to protect as much as we can. We know that we did have reductions in summer school, you know, which is unfortunate, but, you know, we just reduced summer school based on who would need that from an eligibility standpoint. You know, we eliminated our cost of attendance. That was a 6-figure hit. Obviously, you know, at least some travel certainly will be saved. So there are cuts. And then, you know, the individual sports know that there'll be a percentage cut coming to them. So when the university ultimately says, hey, this is the cut that we've assigned to athletics, you know, we'll see where we stand on that. But you know, ultimately, you know, we'll get some direction from campus, but we as a group have not discussed furloughs or layoffs or anything like that.
Mario, talking about the longer term effects, I know you said travel could potentially be impacted by, you know, some of the financial ramifications of today's decision. now looking forward to not sports necessarily in the fall, but sports in the winter. I mean, men's and women's basketball, they're now postponed to the end of the fall with the WAC's decision because you get back into the conference realm. What are the impacts that, you know, the later start, I guess, for not much later, but the later start will have on the men's and women's basketball programs? And if you had conversations with Coach Chancellor, Coach Atkinson on any adjustments they're going to have to make?
Yeah, let me just clarify that. So, you know, I think the WAC statement, I don't have it in front of me, said that men's and women's basketball would not start participating until November 1st. I believe that was correct. That was a decision that was talked about, you know, probably now over a month ago. And that was when fall sports were still potentially having an NCAA fall championship. Now that that's out of the mix, I believe the WAC will probably revisit that. All that would mean is, you know, that they might be able to have those 1 or 2 control scrimmages that usually take place either in very early November or very late in October. So that'll be discussed, but certainly, yeah, like I said, you know, basketball is the next up. It's certainly the next big discussion topic, and it'll be discussed within our league, and we'll certainly look and see what's coming out from a national standpoint.
Will the budget effects from, say, the UCLA, the Florida games, will those potentially have any effects on the basketball seasons this year?
Well, no, not necessarily. You know, a lot of people think we take money and it goes into a specific pot. You know, it just goes into the big cauldron. So yeah, minus $2.75 million is gonna stink, you know, and that's gonna carry, you know, with us. So I'm not going to get over my skis with my chancellor and my 2 regents on the Zoom. But you know, the one way that we have to replace that money is by you know, playing guarantee games. Now at New Mexico State, we've been playing 2 guarantee games, and we've been doing that to reduce that deficit that had ballooned at one point to $9.5 million. And now we got it down to 2.5. I mean, we paid back $7 million on that. We were trending in a great direction. And now, you know, we get a big correction in the market. So we'll need to look at that as our primary revenue source. Certainly we'll always sell tickets, all that other stuff, but I'm talking 7-figure type things. You know, the football program here has been in the unenviable position of being a revenue generator from that standpoint. Now, we also have to be mindful of overtaxing the program. You know, last year we played Ole Miss, Washington State, coming off a 10-win season in Alabama. You know, if we make a decision to do that, I would suggest that, you know, we also are gonna, you know, look through football in a little bit different of a lens from an expectational standpoint from wins and losses. But no, it is not going to affect men's and women's basketball from a budget standpoint for this year, but we will be coming up with a strategy on how to make budget and reduce whatever we incur this year that we can't pay for.
Anything else for Mario or Chancellor Arvizu or any of the other coaches on the call here?
I have one for Coach Martin.
Yes.
Coach, your thoughts on Texas continuing to move forward with high school football, and if they do have a season at the same time frame as years before, is there any possibility you get to go recruit that, or how do you approach on?
Brandon, you were breaking up there. Could you ask that question again?
Yeah, Texas football, high school football. They're planning on moving forward on time, same time frame as last year. Your thoughts on that, and also what the potential recruiting you'll be able to do with that, if at all.
Yeah, well, obviously, if they're playing, it's much more advantageous to us to be able to see a senior play to recruit. You know, as opposed to in New Mexico, they're not going to be playing this year, so all your evaluations have to come off of junior film. That's a little bit tougher, you know, and obviously you're not going to get to see them play in person. With Texas playing, you know, if we are allowed to travel and recruit, then we can see them play in person. But there's a lot of rules yet to be put forth by the NCAA concerning what are we allowed to do in recruiting? You know, are we allowed to bring kids on official visits? Because right now that doesn't look good. Are we allowed to travel off campus to evaluate kids? Because right now going out of state, again, there's that 14-day quarantine and those type of things that will come into play with that. So even the recruiting part of things is really up in the air right now.
Hey Mario,
Coach Martin,
has there been any?
just from a standpoint of just coaches are always talking about being prepared for everything. I mean, just how hard is it? You speak on recruiting, you speak on, you know, this and just, I mean, just how unprecedented is this and how do you, you know, kind of where does your attention go from here? And maybe Coach Jordan could also touch on that a little bit.
Well, I think our attention right now is on the players, you know, players that are here. You know, they're going through a lot. I mean, these guys have mentally, it's been really hard, I think, on all of our players, all the athletes here, and just the uncertainty of everything. And then it is, you know, planning for your program in the future too. You know, you've got to figure out what the rules are going to be and then how to best, you know, move your program forward.
I would echo that. This is a player-centered universe. Our student athletes are our number one priority, and I just want to communicate with them. Well, it is crazy in a lot of ways. The hardest part is the inability to give any real solid answers. That's the frustrating part for them and certainly us. But we'll work through it. They're young, they're resilient, and like I said earlier, they're, you know, right now they're happy to be practicing and doing what they love. So we'll live with that for now.
Mario or Braun, have there been any conversations with the teams that you lost or the teams that you still had scheduled about rescheduling those games for either the spring or future money games?
Well, the phone calls, yeah, I'll just tag on to Andy's comment. You know, Andy, I asked the coaches to reach out to other coaches who have been involved in the pandemics, but those coaches from 1917 weren't around anymore. So this is all brand new for all of us. Yeah, Jason, so all the calls I was getting, you know, from the schools that canceled, whether it was Florida or UCLA, you know, I had to make those calls today. So I spoke with, ironically enough, the two Southland athletic directors, Sunbelt athletic directors who were on an AD's call, but we communicated via text. They got my voicemail. I talked to Jim Center, and I talked to Larry Tice over at Texas State. Braun laughed because 3 of the 4 ADs, I've worked with those guys, you know, 1 at UNM and 2 at Missouri. So that made for a little easier conversations. We have not had any substantive conversations about what the spring looks like, even though we certainly want to play, you know, as many games as coach would think's prudent. So whether it's Army, UMass, UConn, Liberty, you know, we'll have those discussions with them soon.
Right. Anything else for Mario Moccia or Chancellor Arvizu or Coach Jordan or Coach Martin? Okay, perfect. If that wraps everything up, I'll get this to everybody. We've been recording the whole time, so just for everybody's record. So, Mario, anything else to close?
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody. You guys know I've got a pretty good record of calling everybody right back. There was some calls I didn't make immediately because I thought it was critical to be able to tell our teams first, even though in this day and age, you can't really keep anything out of the media before you tell the student athletes, but that's something that I really wanted the effort to do that. But just appreciate everybody. And, you know, we'll communicate with whatever news we have as soon as we have it. And certainly appreciate, you know, good or bad. We like the good better, but certainly appreciate all the work you guys do in covering us. And I know many of you have your home teams that the Aggies aren't first, you know, the primary, but we certainly appreciate everything you do. Except
Thank
you,
you.
Jeff, because you're an Aggie alum. All right. So, you know, you've got an extra burden here, my man.
Get him. All right, you guys be safe. Thank you.
All right, perfect. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
All right.